What do these things mean? What does Fed approves quarter point rate cut but is divided on further action? Why does it even matter that the central bank announces it's taking its benchmark overnight rate and target rate 1.7 to 2%? Dot plot. What does all this stuff mean? Oh, there is that too. What is this? Fed ups its GDP forecast slightly to 2.1%. Fed cuts rates by a quarter point, but facing growing split. Wall Street Journal. Central bankers divided over Wednesday's decision. The outlook for further reductions. The Federal Reserve voted to cut interest rates by the quarter percentage point for the second time in many months to cushion economy against a global slowdown amplified by U.S.-China deal. So divided Fed cuts rates a notch, drawing Trump rebuke. So what are all these things? Well, it's probably helpful to look at what the Federal Reserve is. The Federal Reserve System is the central banking system in the United States. It was created in 1913. Yeah. Right. Let's. History of the Federal Reserve is certainly interesting, but well, all right. Wikipedia has decided to change itself a little bit today. Federal Reserve System, also known as the Fed, created in 1913. Monetary panic. Oh, well, that's nice. Right. After a series of financial panics, particularly the Panic of 1907, led the desire for central control monetary systems in order to alleviate financial crises. Over the years, creation events such as the Great Depression, Great Recession have led to the expansion of the roles and responsibility of the Federal Reserve. So there's three key monetary objectives for the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve Act, which created this in 1913. Maximizing employment, stabilizing process, and moderating long-term interest rates. First two objectives are sometimes referred to the Federal Reserve's dual mandate. Its duties have expanded over the year to also include supervising regulatory banks, maintaining stability of the financial system, and providing financial services to depository institutions, the U.S. government, foreign institutions. The Fed Research Economy provides numerous publications such as the Beige Book, Fred Database. Yeah, interesting stuff. It really is, actually. The Federal Reserve System is composed of several layers. You got your presidentially appointed Board of Governors, 12 regional Federal Reserve banks in that map, roughly correlating to the Courts of Appeals, but not really. Federal Open Market Committee, and let's go down to its interest, because that's what we wanted to talk about. Interest rate target has its bank rate, interest paid, bank rate, we'll get to that. Monetary policy refers to the actions undertaken by the central bank, such as the Federal Reserve, to influence and availability of cost of money. 1973 Act gave the Federal Reserve to authority to set monetary policy of the United States. This is often discussed in relation to the Bretton Woods Act, or the Bretton Woods system was a system of monetary management, established the rules for commercial financial relations after the Bretton Woods Agreement, right? And we moved away from the gold standard. You got your International Monetary Fund, International Bank of Reconstruction and Development. Right. The Soviets later declined to ratify the agreements. All right, bank rate, also known as discount rate, is the rate of interest of which a central bank charges on its financial loans advances to commercial banks. The bank rate is known by a number of different terms, depending on the country, and has changed over time in some countries as the mechanism used to manage the rate have changed as the mechanism used to manage the rate have changed. Okay, whenever a bank has shortage funds, they can typically borrow the central bank monetary policy of the country. Interesting stuff, right? So hopefully that kind of gives you some more background about why all this stuff is important. I mean, it's important to follow these things because they have wide implications. And it's easy to look these things up. Maybe you can spell things correctly, but They measure economic variables. There's a long history to central banking in the U.S. And remember, this is different from the Treasury. It has a structure quite unique among central banks that is also unusual. The U.S. Department of Treasury, an entity outside the central bank, prints the currency that's used. Also, the Treasury overlooks the IRS, which is sort of the tax collecting authority. It's the United States. Things are different, and that's okay. Alcohol, Tobacco, and Tax Bureau, Engraving and Printing, Fiscal Service, FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, Inspector General, Treasury Inspector for Tax Administration, Internal Revenue Service, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Remember, a lot of these guys are connected with OIRA too. OIRA, which is the Office of Regulatory and Information and Regulatory Affairs. They're absolutely important for the regulatory process. Sub-agency within the Office of Management and Budget, which in turn is within the Executive Office of the President. OIRA sees the implementation of government-wide policies, reviews draft regulation. Under this executive order, the Paperwork Reduction Act and the Information Quality Reduction Act. So basically, it's part of like the executive branch. So when like you follow the APA procedure for making laws, so APA regulation, Administrative Procedure Act, basically governs the way in which administrative agencies of the federal government may propose and establish regulations. It's really important, and it has very important issues for judicial review. Here's a freebie. A lot of people mess up beg the question. To beg the question is to put forward an argument whose validity requires that its own conclusion be true, also called a petitio principii. The fallacy is an attempt to support a claim with the premise that itself is presumptuous to the claim. It's not actually asking a question. And it came up from Aristotle originally, but in the modern vernacular usage is raising a question. Sometimes it's confused with dodging the question or attempting to avoid it. So it's an informal fallacy that occurs when arguments' premises assume that the truth of the conclusion, instead of supporting it, is a typical type of circular reasoning. An argument that requires the desired conclusion be true. This often occurs in indirect ways, such as the fallacy presence is hidden or at least not easily apparent.